Have you ever felt that there are connections that transcend the physical? That when you look into certain people's eyes it seems like you've known them for 1,000 lives? Or that with others, despite your efforts, you can never really tune in? What if I told you that these sensations are not random? According to Carl Jung, one of the most profound thinkers in analytical psychology, our relationships are actually bridges between souls, reflections of our collective unconscious that seek to guide us towards our spiritual plenitude. Stop for a moment, breathe deep down and ask yourself, are you living in relationships that nourish your soul, or are you simply coasting on superficial connections that drain your vital energy? Don't read on until you've really thought about this, because what we're going to explore today could completely transform the way you relate to others and, most importantly, to yourself. Jung observed something fascinating about human nature. We cannot build authentic relationships with others until we first relate to ourselves. Seems simple, doesn't it? But here is the paradox that few dare to face. Every time you prioritize an external relationship over your internal relationship, every time you ignore your own needs to meet those of others, you are creating a spiritual imbalance that will eventually destroy both connections. The current world bombards us constantly with contradictory messages about relationships. We are told that we must sacrifice ourselves for others, that true love means always putting others first. But Jung had a radically different perspective. He understood that true love, the one that transforms and transcends, can only emerge from authenticity. And authenticity requires first honoring your own being. Imagine for a moment that you are trying to fill someone else's glass while yours is empty. Am I sustainable? Of course. Yet that's exactly what many of us do in our relationships. We empty ourselves trying to nurture external connections, forgetting that every relationship is a reflection of our inner world. Jung coined the term projection to describe how we unconsciously transfer aspects of ourselves, our fears, desires, and shadows onto the people we interact with. Those irritations you feel towards your partner, that excessive admiration for a friend, even that irrational hatred for a coworker. According to Jung, everyone is a mirror. Mirrors of parts of yourself that you have not integrated, that you have repressed, or that you have not recognized. Think about the last time you felt intense attraction or rejection from someone you barely knew. Isn't it fascinating how we can develop such strong feelings toward people we know so little about? Jung would explain that these intense reactions are often projections of your own unconscious. You are not really in a relationship with this person, but with an unknown part of yourself. This understanding completely changes the game of relationships. Because if every person who comes into your life is on some level a messenger of your own inner being, then every conflict, every attraction, every rupture has a spiritual purpose to bring you back to yourself. Spiritually conscious relationships, from the Jungian perspective, are not about finding the perfect person or keeping the peace at all costs. It's about using each interaction as an opportunity for self-knowledge and integration. It's about asking yourself, what is this relationship trying to show me about myself? Jung firmly believed in the concept of anima and spirits, the feminine and masculine energies that dwell within each of us, regardless of our physical gender. According to him, much of the romantic attraction consists of finding someone who embodies those qualities of our anima or spirits that we have not yet integrated. It's as if we unconsciously look for what we lack on the inside to recognize on the outside. Therefore, many relationships begin with this feeling of having found our other half. It's not so much that this person completes something that we lack, but that they reflect to us parts of ourselves that we had relegated to the shadows. Falling in love in this light is in reality a reunion with forgotten aspects of our own soul. But what happens when this first phase of fascination wears off? When do we start to see each other's flaws? When irritation replaces admiration, when what once attracted us now repels us. According to Jung, this is the crucial moment where the real spiritual work of the relationship begins. It's easy to love the bright parts of someone. What really challenges our capacity for conscious love is also embracing its shadows. And here is the secret that few understand. We cannot fully accept the shadows of others until we haven't embraced ours. This is the inflection point where many relationships break or transform. How many times have you found yourself repeating the same painful patterns in your relationships, The same type of partner, the same conflicts, the same ruptures. Jung called this repetition compulsion, an unconscious attempt to resolve outstanding traumas or integrations. Your psyche is trying to give you another opportunity to heal, to see what you couldn't see before, until you consciously relate to yourself, to your wounds, your fears, your rejected parts. You will continue to attract situations and people that force you to face what you try to avoid. It's as if the universe is repeatedly insisting, look, here, there's something important you need to learn. One of Jung's most profound contributions to the understanding of relationships was his exploration of the collective unconscious, that vast ocean of archetypes, symbols, and ancestral memories that we share as humanity. According to Jung, we connect with others not only on a personal level, but also through this invisible network of shared meanings. When you feel an inexplicable connection with someone, as if you've known them your whole life, it could be a recognition at the level of the collective unconscious. Those people who seem to come into our lives at just the right moment to teach us something crucial. Jung saw them as synchronic manifestations, moments where our inner and outer worlds align perfectly. But building spiritually conscious relationships requires more than hoping for magical connections. It requires a constant commitment to your own individuation process. This journey Jung described as the path to psychic wholeness, where we integrate all the fragmented parts of our being. This process is not for the faint of heart. It involves facing your own contradictions, accepting your defects, reconciling yourself with your shadows. Because as Jung deeply understood, the most important relationship you will ever have is the relationship with yourself. And the quality of all your other relationships will directly depend on how honest and deep this primary connection is. Imagine for a moment what your relationships would be like if you no longer needed others to complete you, validate you, or save you. If he no longer projected his emotional needs onto them, nor blamed them for not filling his voids. Imagine relating from plenitude instead of need. This is what Jung would call a relationship between complete individualities, two beings in the process of integration who accompany each other in their spiritual evolution. One of Jung's most revolutionary ideas was his understanding of the shadow. Those parts of us that we deny, repress, or reject because we consider them unacceptable. We all have a shadow, and paradoxically, the more we try to hide it from others, the more clearly we project it in our relationships. Have you ever noticed how the flaws that most irritate you in others are often precisely those that you refuse to recognize in yourself? Doesn't that person who seems controlling to you reflect your own fear of losing control? Doesn't that friend whose insecurity exasperates you show you something about your own unacknowledged insecurities? Jung invites us to use every relational friction as an opportunity for self-knowledge. When someone triggers a disproportionate reaction in you, instead of immediately blaming the other person, ask yourself, what is this person touching in me? What part of my shadow is helping me see? This approach completely transforms the dynamics of our relationships. Instead of turning them into battlefields where we fight to be right, they become sacred spaces for mutual growth. The other stops being the enemy and becomes the mirror, the catalyst, the master. But integrating the shadow doesn't mean indiscriminately displaying our darkest parts or using authenticity as an excuse for destructive behavior. Jung emphasized the importance of discernment and personal responsibility. True authenticity includes awareness of how our actions affect others. This brings us to another crucial Jungian concept, the persona, that social mask that we all wear and that allows us to function in community. Jung personified it as something inherently negative or false. On the contrary, he recognized its adaptive value. The problem arises when we identify so much with our mask that we lose touch with our true being. In spiritually conscious relationships, there is a delicate balance between authenticity and thoughtfulness. It's not about completely discarding social filters in the name of truth, but about ensuring that our masks are genuine extensions of our being, not disguises that hide it. How many relationships have you maintained under a false persona? How many times have you pretended to be someone you're not to gain approval or avoid rejection? And most importantly, what price did you pay for these connections based on appearance rather than substance? Jung believed that our deepest relationships can only flourish when we have the courage to show ourselves as we are, with our strengths and vulnerabilities, our lights and shadows. This authentic vulnerability creates a space where others can also take off their masks. It is an act of courage that invites reciprocity. But being authentic does not mean being impulsive or inconsiderate. Mindful communication in relationships requires both honesty and compassion. Jung understood that truth without love can be cruel, but love without truth eventually becomes empty. A spiritually conscious relationship cultivates both elements. It allows you to express your truth while holding a sacred space for another's truth, even when it differs from yours. It's not about imposing your reality, but about creating together a third space where both perspectives can coexist and enrich each other. This type of transformative communication rarely comes naturally. It requires intention, practice, and, most importantly, self-knowledge. Because, as Jung repeatedly pointed out, we cannot clearly communicate what we have not first clarified within ourselves. Have you ever found yourself overreacting to something seemingly small that your partner or a friend said? Or perhaps I felt disproportionate pain at a comment that objectively didn't seem so serious. Jung would explain that you have probably experienced what he called a constellation when a current comment or situation activates an unconscious complex, an older, deeper emotional wound. In these moments, you are no longer responding simply to the present situation, but to an entire history of accumulated pain. And the fascinating thing is that the person in front of you has often been drawn into your life, precisely because it has the ability to touch those wounds that need attention and healing. Jung saw these painful interactions not as cosmic mistakes or luck, but as precise invitations to psychic integration. Each difficult relationship thus becomes a map that signals exactly where you need to do your inner work. This brings us to one of Jung's most revolutionary ideas about relationships, his understanding of marriage as an alchemical container for mutual transformation. Jung was not only referring to legal union, but to any deep commitment, where two people consciously decide to accompany each other in their process of growth. For Jung, the highest spiritual purpose of an intimate relationship is not constant happiness or the absence of conflict. It is the transformation of the soul. It is using the crucible of daily intimacy as a mirror where each person can see themselves more clearly and move towards their wholeness. This explains why some of the deepest relationships are also the most challenging. We came not to find those who keep us comfortable in our comfort zones, but those who challenge us to expand, to face our limitations, to become more integrated versions of ourselves. The Jungian perspective frees us from the superficial narrative that dominates our culture. The idea that a good relationship is one free from problems or challenges. Instead, it invites us to evaluate our connections, not for their comfort, but for their ability to catalyze us to our highest potential. Think about the most transformative relationships in your life. They probably weren't the easiest, right? They were the ones who forced him to grow, who showed him parts of himself he hadn't seen before, who pushed him to the edge of his comfort zone and beyond. Jung also deeply explored the concept of synchronicity, those seemingly casual but meaningful moments that seem to connect our inner world with the outside. Synchronous relationships occur when we meet someone exactly at the moment when our spiritual development needs the catalyst that this person represents. Have you ever experienced meeting someone and immediately feeling that there is a greater purpose in that meeting? A feeling that this is not a coincidence, but a meeting arranged by the universe? Jung would suggest that you are perceiving correctly. Our most meaningful connections are rarely accidental. They are external manifestations of our own internal process of evolution. But here's the challenge. We often don't recognize these synchronous invitations because we are seeking in relationships what feels familiar to us instead of what would help us evolve. We are attracted to people who reinforce our known patterns, even when those patterns cause us suffering. Jung observed that many people unconsciously repeat dysfunctional family dynamics in their adult relationships, not because they enjoy the suffering, but because the familiar, even when it is painful, feels safer than the unfamiliar. This is the power of the unconscious in our relational choices. The path to more conscious relationships begins with this radical question. Am I choosing out of habit or conscience? Am I repeating patterns from the past or creating new possibilities from my most authentic self? The good news is that awareness changes everything. Once you start to see your patterns, you are no longer completely at their mercy. You can begin to make different choices, to build relationships that reflect not your conditioning, but your essential truth. One of the most powerful tools Jung offered us for this work was dream analysis. He believed that our dreams show us aspects of our relationships that our conscious minds have not yet recognized. If you pay attention to how the important people in your life appear in your dreams, you could discover layers of meaning that transform your understanding of these connections. Have you ever dreamed about someone in a way that completely contradicts how you consciously see them? A love partner who appears distant in your dreams, or a friend who appears harmless on the surface but appears threatening in your dreams? Jung would say that your unconscious is showing you something important that your conscious mind passed by. This deep inner work is essential to building spiritually conscious relationships. Because until we recognize the unconscious forces that guide our attractions and repulsions, we will continue to be dragged by psychic currents that we do not understand. Jung challenges us to take full responsibility for our relational experience. This means stopping blaming others for our emotional distress and starting to ask ourselves, what part of me needs attention here? What do I need to learn from this situation? When you take on this responsibility, something magical happens. Your relationships stop being battlefields, where you fight to be right, and become sacred temples where you cultivate presence. You no longer need others to change to feel good. Reclaim your power to transform your own experience from within. This does not mean tolerating abusive relationships or staying in situations that violate your core values. Instead, true inner work gives you the clarity and strength to set healthy boundaries and walk away from connections that don't honor your essential being. Jung firmly believed that our most meaningful relationships have a purpose that transcends the personal. They are vehicles for the collective evolution of consciousness. Every time you heal a wound in your psyche, you are contributing to the healing of the collective unconscious. Each time you relate from a more integrated place, you are elevating the energetic field of all your relationships. Imagine a world where more and more people take on this work of psychic integration and conscious relationship, where instead of projecting our shadows onto external enemies, we recognize these shadows as our own and integrate them with compassion. Wouldn't this completely transform our collective reality? This vision is not utopian. It is the practical and urgent work that Jung invites us to do. It starts with a single person willing to look within, to take responsibility for their inner world, to relate from authenticity rather than necessity. Are you ready to take this step? To convert your relationships from battlefields into temples of transformation, to use each interaction as an opportunity to know yourself more deeply and move into your wholeness? The path is not easy. It requires courage to face what you have been avoiding, honesty to recognize your patterns, and compassion to integrate the rejected parts of yourself. But as Jung understood, this is the only path that leads to truly satisfying and evolutionary relationships. Each time you choose awareness over autopilot, authenticity over appearance, growth over comfort, you are contributing to elevating not only your own relationships, but the collective field of all relationships. Humans. And when you take this step, you discover something surprising. What I desperately sought in others. Recognition, validation, unconditional love begins to emerge from within. You become the source of what you once begged for, and from this place of fullness you can offer others not your emptiness or your need, but the overflow of your integrated being. This is what Jung would call a relationship between individuated beings, two people committed to their own totality, who come together not to complete each other, but to celebrate and mutually enhance their essential plenitude. I want you to stop for a moment and think about your current relationships. Which of them invite you to grow, to expand, becoming a more integrated version of yourself? And which ones seem to keep you stuck in old patterns, in more limiting family dynamics? It's not about judging these relationships as good or bad, but about honestly recognizing which ones are in line with your spiritual evolution and which ones could be obstructing it. Sometimes the relationships we need most are not the ones that make us feel most comfortable, but the ones that challenge us to transcend our current limitations. Teaches us that each person who enters our life can be seen as a teacher or a mirror. Some come to show us our shadows, others to remind us of our lights. Some appear briefly to catalyze needed change. Others accompany us for long stretches of the path. All are sacred when we see them through the eyes of consciousness. The next time you find yourself in conflict with someone, instead of immediately falling into defense or attack, try this Jungian approach. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, What is this person trying to show me about myself? What part of my shadow am I projecting onto them? This simple change of perspective can completely transform your relationship dynamics. The other stops being the problem and becomes the messenger. Conflict stops being a battle to win and becomes an opportunity to grow. And when you extend this awareness to all your relationships with your partner, your friends, your family, your colleagues, and even strangers, you begin to experience what Jung would call a synchronistic life, where every encounter has meaning, where nothing is casual, where everything is interconnected in the great dance of evolutionary consciousness. Allow me to invite you to an experiment. Over the next week, approach each relationship in your life as if it is exactly what your soul needs to evolve. Every irritation, every conflict, every deep connection, all perfectly designed for your spiritual growth. Notice how your experience changes when you adopt this perspective. What if every person who came into your life, including those who caused you the most pain, were actually allies of your soul, collaborators on your journey to wholeness? This is the revolutionary vision that Jung offers us about relationships. I conclude with this reflection. Spiritually conscious relationships are not destinations we arrive at, but practices we cultivate day by day. It's not about finding the perfect person, but about developing the ability to relate in an increasingly conscious, authentic, and compassionate way. First with yourself and then with others. The miracle is that when you commit to this inner path, your outer relationships begin to transform. People who resonate with your new frequency appear in your life. Toxic connections naturally dissolve or transform, not because you are manipulating the outside, but because you have changed the vibration of your inner being. This is the great secret that Jung discovered. You don't need to change the world to experience more fulfilling relationships. You need to change the consciousness with which you perceive and participate in your relationships. And that change starts with a decision. The decision to see yourself and others not through the eyes of fear, lack, or need, but through the eyes of love, integrity, and spiritual freedom. If this message resonates deep within you, if you feel there is a truth here that calls to you, I invite you to share it with others who might benefit from this perspective. Share this video, leave your experience in the comments. Tell me how these Jungian ideas are transforming your way of relating. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, this is the perfect time to do so. Each week we explore together these deep territories of consciousness and personal transformation, inspired by great spiritual and psychological masters like Carl Jung. Remember, the change you seek in your relationships begins with changing your relationship with yourself. And this inner journey, although sometimes challenging, is the most rewarding one you will ever undertake. Because in the end, as Jung deeply understood, all of our relationships are reflections of the great relationship, the relationship with our own soul. Thank you for being here, for your presence, for your desire to grow. See you in the next video, where we will continue exploring together the depths of being human and the mystery of our connections. See you soon.